we begin, just wanted to do a quick territorial acknowledgement. It is with great respect that the Experiential Learning Hub acknowledges that the University of Guelph resides on the ancestral lands of the Attawandaron people and the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We uphold the significance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant and the continuing relationship our Indigenous neighbours have with this land. We recognize many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and acknowledging them reminds us of our relationships to this land where we learn and work. So again, welcome everybody to the first event of our Careers Impacting the Environment series. I'd like to again welcome our lovely panelists here today that have graciously agreed to offer up their time and their expertise with us today to share their career journeys and insights with all of you. I'm super excited to hear what they have to say. So all of the panelists' names and titles are on the screen, but we have with us Brittany Bright, whose role is in communications at the Hydrogen Business Council. Samantha Cava, organizer with conservation at Nature Canada. Mary Mullen, a junior environmental scientist, new role. So if this is confusing, she has recently just begun a new role from my understanding. So this is maybe not what you have seen on the website, but this is as of today. Congratulations. Well, not as of today. I know you started a little bit earlier, but congratulations on the new role with Chung and Vander Dolan Engineering Limited. So exciting things are happening there. Natalie Vasilivetsky, an environmental sustainability coordinator with the Department of Sustainability here at the University of Guelph. And Ben Verzijlenberg, I hope and pray that I said that right, invasive species program coordinator acting with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. So thank you to all of you again for being here today. As I've said multiple times, but I will just repeat one more time, my colleague Julia will shortly begin moderating and asking some wonderful questions of our panelists. And if you have questions, please type them in the chat, and my colleague Nicola will be assisting with making sure your questions get answered. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Julia. Thanks again for being here, everyone.
Thanks, Carolina, and thanks, everyone. Students, as you have your questions, please feel free to pop those in the chat. But just to get us rolling, I thought it would be interesting if each of the panelists could just tell us a little bit about the roles that you're currently in and how you feel that they are making a positive impact in the environment. And I'm just going to start with who's on my leftmost screen, and that's you, Ben.
All right. Yeah, so the role I'm in currently as the invasive species program coordinator, there's two main parts for it. We have a private lands program, as well as several contracts with federal and provincial lands. But basically, it all boils down to removing invasive Phragmites from the Norfolk area. So the work that we do here, or the work that I do, for the last few months, I've been working on the planning and budgeting side of that, making sure that we're ready for the season and that all the equipment is set up, as well as getting it all purchased and working through the fun timelines that we find ourselves in with the COVID world. Once summer comes around, I'll be switching more to on-the-ground work, coordinating several technicians. We have a new team of 4 starting, as well as a few contractors, and they'll be going out and spraying herbicides. So killing the Phragmites, and then in the fall we'll be physically removing it, whether that's rolling it down or cutting it and burning it. So the big impact that that it has for the environment is Phragmites is affecting a lot of the wetlands here on the coast, as well as further inland, and you've probably seen it along the highway. It's extremely invasive, and because of how tall and dense it is, once it establishes in a spot, there's no native vegetation or animals that can live there anymore. So that's why we remove it, so that we can restore that habitat and make sure that there's a home for the birds, fish, and turtles like live in our wetlands. So that's my job in a nutshell, I think.
That's great. Interesting. Thanks for that, Ben. How about you, Brittany?
Sure. So I guess a little bit about what I do right now. I'm actually involved at 2 different organizations at the moment. I work for, as you can see on the screen, I do communications, really events and stakeholder engagement at the Hydrogen Business Council. So that is a small non-for-profit organization based here in Ontario that's really about trying to organize and promote about the hydrogen economy, which I'm not going to open that can of worms yet, I suppose, but hopefully we'll get there. But basically about the hydrogen economy based on green hydrogen in Ontario, trying to organize about how can we actually help industry around this start going, and ultimately what green hydrogen, the thing that our organization is all about, what it is all about is basically use as an alternative energy or fuel source that is emissions free. Another organization I do some work with is Next Hydrogen, which is actually a company based here in Ontario as well that designs and manufactures the equipment that's called electrolyzers, and basically those are the machines that make green hydrogen. So in both of those roles, I'm really seeing that my impact on the environment is through hydrogen as sort of a like an alternative energy source. And I think as we all know, where our energy comes from has a big impact on the environment. So trying to move our society to cleaner sources of energy is really my way of impact. And it's I would note that something specific or something distinct to the sort of work that I'm working on is it seems very top down in some ways compared to some other roles you might see are a bit more trying to affect change that's bottom up, like trying to affect how individuals behave, trying to make them behave in more environmentally friendly ways. And here it's ultimately we're trying to build up an industry that is more environmentally friendly so that it's available for everyone to use and reduce their carbon impact.
That's great. Thanks for that perspective. It's interesting to think about that top-down versus bottom-up approaches, and yeah, just how hands-on, I guess, too, that the students might want to be with the work they do in the environment. Mary, can we hear from you next?
Hi, so currently I am a junior environmental scientist with Chung and Vanderdolen. In a nutshell, it's environmental consulting. So there are many things. There's not really like a typical one thing I do, but primarily I go out, I do some field work, we do some environmental drilling, we collect soil samples, we test wells, and just kind of that scope of things. And then in this new role too, I'm responsible for some project coordination, so organizing the contractors for the drilling projects and the well installations. I think a big part of environmental consulting impacting the environment is, holding developers and I guess any other new infrastructure, holding them responsible to abide by the environmental regulations. So that's where we come in, and we ensure that they get all their, I guess, cross their T's and dot their I's with regards to the environmental impacts, and just make sure that they're not increasing those. I've done quite a few remediation projects, which are pretty neat. You learn a lot about basically a new way that they have to build and how they have to remove everything and treat it and kind of start from the ground up. Yeah, so I guess that's my impact on the environment in consulting, basically just holding developers accountable and making sure they abide by our Ontario regulations.
It's good to know there are guardians like you out there when we see so much development happening these days around us. Thanks. Natalie, can we hear from you next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie. I'm the Environmental Sustainability Coordinator at the University of Guelph. I also don't really have much of a typical day, so every day is kind of different, and we have a lot of projects kind of cycling through our office. What's very cool about our office is that we get to work with a team of 10 student staff as well as hundreds of volunteers that I can't even count, and we treat campus as a living lab to solve different kinds of environmental issues on our campus. So currently I'm working on a waste reduction action plan with students, and these students are going back to their departments and they're going to other departments, and we're seeing what we can do there. I also do operations management for our organics collection program. I make sure all of the waste data for the university is where it needs to be, and I work with many, many departments on campus. I help them with their purchasing to make sure that they're doing like sustainable procurement, and I also make sure that we're reporting all of our numbers properly. So yeah, that's basically what I do.
Yeah, and again, nice to have that person that's overseen for consistency, because in large organizations like a university, it can be quite siloed, and different departments, different colleges on campus can be doing very different things. So having kind of a unified strategy towards that is so excellent. And I think we're going to see more of these types of roles popping up as time goes on, or at least I hope so. And last but not least, Samantha.
Sure. Yeah, so my name's Sam Cava. I'm currently an organizer at Nature Canada. And if you haven't heard of Nature Canada before, we're a national nonprofit. We do a lot of advocating for the environment. So we basically help support more local nature groups and provincial nature groups to help meet their environmental program related objectives. We also do a lot of lobbying. So we're kind of the middleman between the federal government and local nature groups. So we kind of help speak for them and advocate for environmental movements. Right now, so my role, I am in charge of leading the Protected Areas campaign at Nature Canada, specifically Great Lakes protection and boreal protection. My current project right now, we're working on advocating for the establishment of a national marine conservation area in Lake Ontario, specifically the water surrounding Prince Edward County. And why that's important? Well, the federal government has committed to protecting 25% of land and waters by 2025 and 30% by 2030. And basically, the Parks Canada, who's in charge of creating national parks and national marine conservation areas, has committed to establishing a national marine conservation area in each of Canada's marine ecoregions, one of those ecoregions being Lake Ontario. And Prince Edward County and the surrounding waters has been targeted because of the incredible biodiversity that's there. So of course, when you protect large land masses and waters, you're also protecting incredibly unique and rare biodiverse areas. Specific to that location, there's many important bird areas. So there's a huge migratory pathway that comes through Prince Edward County. And obviously, the more land that's protected, the happier the birds are, the less development pressures. And part of that work is basically I'm trying to mobilize support locally and provincially from nature groups, and also from First Nations, from fisheries, from agricultural community to support this initiative, because at the end of the day, if the federal government doesn't see local and provincial support, then they're going to kind of put it on the back burner and not go ahead with it. So that's my major role here, is mobilizing support and efforts.
Fantastic, very important work. And it's interesting to see how communication plays such a large role in each of your very different careers, and how important that is when it comes to environmental topics. I'm sure I know that many of the students that I work with are really interested to understand how people arrive in these very varied types of careers. So I'm curious to know kind of what your career journey looked like, how you kind of decided or how you got on the pathway that led to the roles that you're in now. And maybe we'll just go around the proverbial table again, if that's okay, and start with you, Ben.
Sure, sounds good. So I don't have a very straightforward answer to that. I think my career path has very much been an example of wandering around to find what I liked and what suited me best. Which really started in co-op. Like the reason I originally took the program was not one for conservation, but rather mostly just how to understand things, more of a greenhouse perspective or kind of direction. But the more co-ops I took on, the more I realized I enjoyed the work, and that it's important work to take on and to be done. So just during undergrad, I had the chance to first work in a few places in Ontario for a city, for a federal, and then also a chance to work in Saskatchewan for the Canadian Wildlife Service. And I think the Wildlife Service really cemented that overall direction. And from there, I just wandered around one contract to another, because there is quite a bit of seasonal work in this career path, and that ended me up here after a few years of seasonal jobs and moving around. So very much trying a little bit of everything and seeing what I liked and what I didn't.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message, Ben, because I think a lot of the students that I talk with feel scared, if they haven't landed on this one very specific career path, and they think, oh, everybody else has it all figured out and I'm the only one who doesn't, know exactly where I'm headed. And man, not to sound too cliche, but if I had a nickel for every time a student said that.
And it's hilarious too, because last August, I came to the realization that what I was doing in that month, what I was doing in August, was plan number 7 for what I had originally intended. So just in the course of 6 months, the world and all my different plans had changed for what I was going to do to what I actually ended up doing. And yeah, and a lot of coworkers that I've have had similar experiences where they go into one thing, but then they hear about something else through a friend or another coworker that they encounter, and then they end up somewhere completely different.
Yeah, and like you said, sometimes you really do just have to try it out and test the waters a little bit to see if it is a good fit for you. And often there are very unique ways you can stack all of those seemingly maybe not super related experiences to come up with this really kind of specialized package of knowledge and experience that can really help to have you stand out in the labor market, which I think is really fantastic. I think some students see moving around a little bit as maybe being a detriment, but actually it can be a huge plus. And I see some other heads of the panelists nodding there, which is nice. Brittany, do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would really say that, when you're a student, that it's the time to really take advantage of that ability to kind of hop around and try different things. Like every summer you get, or every co-op term you get, it's an opportunity to try a new position and learn from there. Maybe you find out some things that you don't like. Hopefully you find some things that you do like and want to continue pursuing with your career. So yeah, this is definitely the time to be trying out a bunch of different things. about my own personal experience. I'm actually, and I'm not the only panelist here who's actually from an arts background, like a study background that's not even in environment to begin with. So Natalie will be talking about that later too, I suppose. But yeah, I wasn't actually even in an environmental program to begin with. I admittedly didn't really know a whole lot about what I wanted to do for a career when I started my undergrad. And luckily, over the course of the 4 years of doing my undergrad, I did find some areas that I wanted to keep pursuing. So ultimately, how I got my start in environment was that I was studying, I was in the European Studies program, which probably no one knows we have that at Guelph. My language of specialization was German, and in part of that program, you go on exchange for a year to a university where you have to study in your language of study. And just before I went on the academic exchange, I also sandwiched in some internships in Germany. I would say too, I'm actually not from a co-op program. So I don't know if there are any students on here who are in a non-co-op program, but like never let that fact hold you back from exploring. Like you still have your summers off, or where you're studying less. But yeah, take your time to explore some internships elsewhere. Someone who will take you on as a, non-co-op. But yeah, so it was actually in my 2 internships in Germany. They both happened to be at energy companies. One, you're much more like conventional utility energy provider for electricity and natural gas. And then my second one was at a company that's more akin to if anyone's familiar with bullfrog power here in Ontario. So basically a retailer of electricity and natural gas in coming to your house that is from a cleaner source. So and basically it was from those experiences that came to me only partway through my undergrad. I started, of course, I finished my undergrad in the same program, but I was doing a lot of work outside of my studies to try to keep that focus on renewable energy and the environment.
And I think it's really nice to hear that you don't necessarily have to be in a science program or in an environmental program to, move your career in that direction. And there are so many different entry points. Also love what you said about not having to be in co-op. And many students at the University of Guelph are not in a co-op program, but there are so many ways to create a meaningful experience for yourself, like you just outlined, between challenging yourself to not go back to that same old reliable grocery store that you've been working at since you were in grade 10, getting different summer jobs, volunteer experiences on and off campus, internships, even extracurricular activities. And I think one of the neat things about careers impacting the environment is that there's so many opportunities in hobbies and doing things like, assisting with species counts that you don't even have to go out of your way to find. You can, find those online and do them on your own and be contributing to something. And many employers are really interested to hear about hobbies and interests that you have that intersect with the environment. And I think it really speaks to your passion. So yeah, so many ways to get those experiences. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, Brittany. Mary, let's hear from you next.
Okay, my path was a little all over the place. I actually went to college first. I took biotechnology, so I graduated in 2014, and I found a job at an environmental lab. So I saw a lot of consultants coming in and bringing in samples, and I always had, an interest in the environment. And like you said, as a hobby, I was a big birder. And I just like loved doing that. And I thought, what would be better than working outside and, you know, doing what these guys do all day. So I started looking into going back to school to figure out what I would need to do what they do, to learn more about the regulations and kind of take a different pathway in my career. So that was what I did. So after I was at the lab for about 7 years, I went back to school. I went to U of G and I took the Bachelor's of Environmental Science. But yeah, for me, like it all started out of a hobby pretty much, and then just seeing, you know, how things work on the other side. And that was kind of my pathway. So yeah, primarily interest and hobby.
Very cool. And love that I chose you to go next to back up the statement that I just made. So
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Yeah, appreciate
No worries.
Natalie.
So I'm going to echo what everyone else is kind of saying. Only like even more drastically, like I think during my undergrad, I took philosophy and anthropology, and I think every single semester I decided that I wanted to be in a different career. I knew I wanted it to be something environmental, but there's just so many things to do. Like as people were talking, I wrote down like a list of coworkers that I have. I work with designers, writers, salespeople, scientists, soil scientists, professors. I work with people in radio. I work with media. I work with just a bunch of graphic designers, artists, and like all of these people are doing environmental things. In our office a couple of years ago, we had one student from marketing, one student from biomed, one student from landscape architecture, and one wildlife biology student. So it's just very, I guess it's kind of like just this huge field. So for me, I knew I wanted to be somewhere in that field sometimes, and I just couldn't figure out what I wanted to do in that field. And through my job, I'm lucky enough that I got to experience a whole bunch of different things. Like I did some radio, like some environmental radio through CFRU on campus. And I do a bunch of stuff with data. Like everything is just, I've kind of changed, I guess, my career path in so many ways. And never in my life did I think that my specialty would be like waste reduction. And I remember when I started, my supervisor was like, okay, like this is the sustainability office. And I was like, great, you know, birding and this and trees. And he was like, okay, we're going to do waste. And I was like, oh, like, is that what we're going to do for a long time? Like, so I was kind of surprised. I thought it was kind of like a small thing. And then it just became like my passion. And I started getting, you know, really excited about it. Which is like a really strange career path to be in. I didn't know it was a career path. I didn't know people got paid to do this. I had no idea. So I guess as an undergrad, I didn't really know, you know, until like my second or third year, A, that such an office existed, B, that people got paid for this, or that any of these things. So it's just it's been a very zigzaggy career path for me. And I'm very open to the idea of like, you know, maybe I'll go private sector later, or maybe I'll, you know, go into research after I'm looking into doing a master's, you know, what am I going to end up doing? So, yeah.
Very cool. And I think all of us probably on the panel and those of us who aren't students can relate to that, you know, being in a job that they never knew existed when they were a student, right? Yeah, and I love how you talk about all the different ways, all the different types of people that you work with, and they're all kind of centered around that theme of the environment, but doing such different types of work, right? So just, yeah, echoes the, you know, the theme of there being so many different ways you can do environmental work without being necessarily specifically an environmental scientist. Well, lovely. And Sam, how about you?
Sure. So I chose the University of Guelph because of the wildlife biology program. Like from a little child, I thought I wanted to be a wildlife vet, and that was it, end of story. And I was lucky enough, as I was going to university, I was lucky enough through a high school co-op, have a reoccurring summer job at the Toronto Zoo. Because of course, wildlife, I wanted to be a wildlife vet in Africa, so it just all made sense. And lucky enough, I did that because I remember one of the days I was shadowing a Toronto Zoo vet, and they brought in a baboon who was attacked by the troop. and had just wounds like down to the bone all over this poor girl's body. And I almost fainted. Like if I can't handle that, then maybe I shouldn't be a vet. If I can't handle blood. And so I'm like, oh shoot, I have to go back to the drawing board now. So I'm like, oh God, what am I gonna do? But that experience also taught me like, okay, it's gonna be really important for me to try out as many things as I can within the environmental field. So that was my plan. I promised myself throughout my 20s, I'm just going to jump ship as much as I can, try as many things, contracts, full-time, whatever it might be, whatever might come my way, I will try it. So after I did, the summers at the Toronto Zoo throughout undergraduate, I was lucky enough to land a summer co-op or summer position at the MNRF. I think it's called something else now, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. And it was geared towards recent graduates. So that's something else I highly recommend looking out for, are summer programs geared towards recent graduates. So I was lucky enough to get a job there. Really enjoyed it. I stuck around doing a few part-time positions through the MNRF, and got a little tired of policy and wanted to try something new. And through that process, I actually was able to work closely with some First Nations, and that kind of really sparked an interest with me. So then I took that interest and I found a job at Ontario Nature, which is a provincial nonprofit, working on their protected areas campaign, working closely with local First Nations. So I carried on that kind of interest there, and really enjoyed the program. I was there for almost 2 years, and I still wanted to try something new. So I've always wanted to work for a conservation authority. So I was lucky enough to get a position with Credit Valley Conservation, and tried out being an ecologist for the planning department, just kind of tune up my ecology skills because I thought that was lacking. And did that for almost 2 years. Again, really enjoyed it, but was missing that protected areas piece in that nonprofit world. So I'm so glad I had that previous experience. And that kind of led me to Nature Canada. And now I'm kind of doing, through all that hardship, going on 8 years of doing that kind of jumping around. I feel like I finally landed in a place where I know what sector I love. I love the nonprofit sector, the topic, I love protected areas, and I love engagement. So it kind of all fits in, through trials and tribulations. It's worth the blood, sweat, and tears, as I'm sure all the panelists would agree, until you get to the place where you're like, okay, I think I like this, and I think I'm going to stick around for a while. So that's been my pathway.
Amazing. And you found value in each of your positions and took away those little pieces and clues that you knew you wanted to put together to find, that perfect role that you're in now. And yeah, very often happens that way. I think a very small percentage of people maybe land in that, ideal job straight out of school. So nice to hear that perspective. Vesta's posed a question in the chat. Thank you for that. And she's wondering, how much overtime is there in your careers, either voluntary or voluntold, and how much traveling do you do? And maybe we'll just start with Ben at the top again, if that's okay.
Sure. That's actually a really good question too. And it varies a lot from one organization to the next. Some places I've been, government especially tends to be very good. Like on the dot, we were in our cars and out the door. So it was very clean that way. Other places, it really runs the gamut. NCC is quite good. Like we try to stick to the schedule as much as possible, but any overtime is banked. And then I have worked for one or two conservation groups. One especially comes to mind, where there was a ridiculous amount of overtime. I think my high score was 14 days in a row, and none of it kept track of. And I actually ended that contract having a discussion in order to get some time off paid. So it was a it does vary a lot, and I would say it's important to keep track of it for yourself, and the better supervisors will help you with that, and won't have that expectation. But there will be some places that unfortunately use you as a free resource, and that's something to be careful of. The other thing I'll say, because it goes to time, is there are setups where it's like an on-off shift work, which is a little bit harder to keep track of, because the like work time and free time is measured more in days rather than hours. So they are typically long days, but usually it's a fair setup that way. I've done like 8 on, 6 off, 9 on, 10 off, that kind of arrangement as well, which I find is much more fair. So it varies a lot, but definitely something to keep an eye on for whenever you enter an organization, or whenever you enter an organization.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing too is that it doesn't have to be an expectation in a role that you're going to be doing all this like unpaid extra work, and that you can find organizations and companies that are more attuned to that work-life balance piece, which is great to know. What has your experience been with overtime and travel, Brittany?
Sure. I think maybe it might be helpful to address those things separately. I'm not sure about the travel. I'm guessing that question maybe comes from, if you're interested in the opportunity to travel and see new places while you're going to your different work experiences. I can understand it might also come from a place of some apprehension, perhaps, about, if you don't want to travel so much, but maybe if you feel that it's a requirement. So I would say, for myself, travel has not been a requirement, although earlier in my career, it was something that I was definitely taking advantage of, or it was something I wanted to do. So as I mentioned already, like I traveled to Germany and was there for over a year, partly for study and for getting work experience. I've also moved to Montreal to work there after my undergrad, and then I moved again when I went to study on a master's, actually. So moving again for school. But yeah, none of those were like part of the job. Those were parts of the job that I particularly sought out. Right now, I'm quite fine to be settled in one place. It's what I want, but it also works well with where I'm at in my career. And actually, I've been doing the work from home thing really since before the pandemic. So that's a thing that is really different, or that students have as an opportunity right now. Going forward, I think there will be more opportunities to do work in a work from home setup, if that's what you want going forward, compared to what has been available in the past. And then, so about overtime and volunteer work or being voluntold, I've worked at a few non-for-profits, some that really do work like a bit like flying by the seat of the pants, sort of small non-profits that don't have a whole lot of resources. So it is hard to track your time, how much time you're putting in to the work there. And I have also worked at one non-for-profit that worked quite a lot like a business. And that was, you're in at 9 o'clock and you're in trouble if you're in at 9:02. And if you are, and then you're done at 5:30. and you have to be able to track what you did down to, periods of 15 minutes in the day. So that was I think the overtime management, I suppose. Yeah, I think I've had quite a lot of both of places where time has been very well managed and you don't have overtime, and some other places where it's there are not enough resources within the organization to really do that time tracking. And then, of course, I know it gets messier too with the fact that we all probably do quite a bit of like volunteer work outside of our day jobs as well. So I think that's, as much as volunteer work is when you're starting out, it's a really great place to explore. Find some meaning in some work, whether you're getting paid for it or not, but it's a good thing to do. I would caution that after you've done it a few times, just make sure that that you're eventually going to be compensated for the work that you're putting in, and that you're able to show the skills that you've been developing from that volunteer work as well.
And so, yeah, like good self-reflection is always a great practice to kind of, understand and keep track of those skills that you're developing, and also hear from all of the panelists so far just about the differences of culture at different companies and organizations. And it really is just as much, students, you're interviewing your employer, just our potential employer, just as much as they're interviewing you and looking for that fit, because different people thrive in different types of environments, for sure. But thanks for that perspective, Brittany. Mary, what has your experience been like?
I would say mine's been a little all over the map as well. I would say in larger organizations, I have found that there's a lot of pressure to do overtime. Mostly because of workload and meeting deadlines. So there's a lot of pressure there. But I mean, if you're willing, it's good experience and you learn a lot working those extra hours, and it can reflect pretty good on you in the beginning of your career. Personally, I mean, I love the opportunity for overtime. If it gets banked or you can take a different day off, I like that. So yeah, I find there's definitely more in the bigger companies. So my last job that I recently left, it was a larger consulting company, and there was also a lot of travel along with that. Consulting typically does have a lot of travel. That company, because they were larger, had some overnight trips, or, a week here, a week there, or driving into the GTA and doing a long day. It's not ideal sometimes, but like if you're willing to travel and you want to go check out a new place, up in Northern Ontario and work for a week, it's a great opportunity. But it's not for everyone. It wasn't really for me, which I found out obviously later. But I thought, hey, this would be great. I'll get to go all over the place. But yeah, it wasn't for me. But some people love it. I know a lot of the younger guys tend to love it. But yeah, it really depends. Like, I'm a little older than the typical age of people starting in this field as well. So I'm a little more settled down. But if you're single and you don't have any pets or anything, or kids, feel free to take on a job like that, where you can get lots of overtime and lots of experience and some travel along the way as well. So yeah, consulting in general, you do have travel, and overtime in the bigger corporations, for sure, there's a big push. It's probably more of a voluntold, depending on the project, because you are working with developers and they love to say that time is money. So if it's going to go into 2 days, they'd prefer if you can get it done in 1. So stuff like that to consider. So typically consulting, yes, you have a lot of travel. My current position, though, it's more local. and that suits me a little more.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. How about you, Natalie?
Oh, there's my microphone. Yeah, I'm gonna echo what other people said as well. In this industry, sometimes there's organizations, as other people have mentioned, that don't have enough resources in order to do what they need to do. On the other hand, there's employees that are young students that have a lot of eco-anxiety, want experience, and want to do as much as they possibly can. This is a recipe for burnout, which is a recipe for disaster, and you don't want to do that.
That's true.
Exactly. So one thing, like, so we talk, all of the sustainability offices in Ontario, colleges, universities, we all talk, and it's a big, big thing at the very beginning of your environmental career. Oh my goodness, I'm in a position where I can actually do some big things for the environment. And for me, that turned into coming into my office at 9 a.m. and leaving my office at 9 p.m. And all weekend I would work and I would volunteer in all of my spare time, and all of my fun things ended up being environmental things. And then it turned into this blur of like, am I working right now? Am I not working? It's a weekend, but I'm, doing this thing for somebody. I burned out really hard, and like, I will admit that now. At the time I was like, this is fine, this is fine, this is great, I love this, I'm getting so much done, I'm so productive. And then a year later, I was like, I'm so exhausted, I can't think anymore. Like, I really, really had really bad burnout. And now I'm like, okay, how do we fix this? So with the students that I have coming in now, one of the first slides in our intro presentation is like right away, we say like, okay, we're going to talk about burnout and how we're not going to burn out. So I'm saying 5 o'clock, I'm never going to message you. Don't message me after 5. Lunchtime, everybody go take lunchtime. You need a break, tell me, like, go do your thing. You need like a week off. Like, and we have that, that luxury, I guess. So like if a student says like, hey, I just need to go to BC for a week because I'm like losing it. There's like so much school going on and I'm really stressed. Go, and mental health always takes first priority. If the project needs to, wait a little bit, that's okay. And like right away we say like that, like right at the beginning, summer students coming in for 4 months, and I just tell them right away that like, you're not going to save the entire environment and the earth and, undo decades of environmental capitalism in one summer. We're not going to save the environment this summer. We're not doing it. So take that off of your shoulders. And like, what we're going to do is like, we're going to help this one thing and we're going to make it better. But like, don't overstretch yourself, because that makes you leave the industry, and that, burnout's not good. So I think like your own mental health first, and then your job second. And like, when you're really, starting out in my career, for instance, like I was in a lot of student debt, and like, I was very vulnerable to these kinds of things. Now a little later in my career, I'm like, okay, like I can say no. So I like had to really, really learn how to like, no, I'm not going to do this thing for you that you asked me to do at 4 p.m. by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Like, no, sorry, I'm busy. No, I don't have the capacity to do this. Like, I just had to really get those boundaries out there. So that's something like in the industry, like definitely a big problem, definitely something that we're trying to address. And yeah, as far as travel, one time I went to the faraway city of Hamilton, Ontario, and for a weekend for a conference, and like other than that, not really. But I know that, my colleagues in other sustainability offices, there's like some that are operations based, like ours, where we, do on the ground stuff. And there's others that are academic based. So the academic based ones will like, get flown to a conference in Europe or something like that. But we don't really do that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you touch on a few really important topics there. I mean, when we think about working on the environment, it's something that can feel really overwhelming to a lot of people, right? And that need to fix things, and just kind of having that self-awareness and keeping that in check and knowing you're working on a piece of it, I think is really important. And also kind of talking about that imposter syndrome versus burnout, and that being a tough tightrope to walk, I think, for a lot of new grads. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing up those topics as well. I think they're important ones to hear about. Sam, do you want to talk about your experiences with travel and overtime?
Sure. So I'll just the travel part first. So pretty much in every job I've had to travel at some capacity, some more localized, some national, some provincial. Right now, my current job, actually, I had to make a big move from the GTA to Ottawa to have this job. So that was my only move that I've had to make for a job. But because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to travel as much. But knock on wood, if things continue to take a positive turn, there will be some national travel involved, especially if you're interested in getting into the engagement, stakeholder aspects of the environmental industry. I would say expect some sort of travel involved. But who knows? I mean, with Zoom and Teams, like a lot of conversations can be done this way now. So travel might not be required, but I would say, if it's of interest, look for jobs that offer that, because it is a really great experience, especially early in your career. Anytime you can travel locally, nationally, take it. I'm going to be a little bit of like devil's advocate when it comes to the overtime stuff. So I can only speak really from the nonprofit world. One, never be expected to get paid for overtime. It's like it's time banked, and then you can kind of take extra days off, because again, monetary wise, there's not much of it going around. When it comes to capacity, nonprofits are usually very small. Like even Nature Canada, we're a national nonprofit, but full-time staff, we have maybe 15 people. So we're taking on, national projects with very, very limited people. So yes, overtime is still sometimes expected. But again, we're compensated for it, right? Like, if we have a certain amount of overtime that we have to put in, we'll take, a few extra days off here and there. When it comes to starting off, I was ready to work my ass off when I graduated. So whether that meant, working from 9 to 9, I was ready to do it, because I was this industry is very competitive, and people told me that throughout undergrad. I'm like, nah, it can't be that competitive. Like there's so many, it's very competitive. So if there's any way, and it's probably not a healthy message, but I was ready to put in the hours, even if it meant, a little bit of a sacrifice the first couple of years. But I felt, now looking back, now I set up my boundaries. I'm 8 years into my career. The first maybe 2, maybe 3 years, yeah, I did work more overtime than I would have liked to admit. But do I regret it? Not really. Yes, I was exhausted, but a lot of sometimes those overtime opportunities actually created more opportunities from it. Whether because you're getting more stuff done, and kind of catching the eye of your your bosses or other external folks. It was hard work for the first 2-3 years, but now I can say that, okay, I know my boundaries. I have a little more responsibility in my life. I'm able to set those boundaries now, but I don't want to. I would say yes. Mental health, of course, is important, and that should be number one, no matter what. But don't be afraid of working a couple extra hours here and there. When it becomes a daily thing, no, that's not good. But here and there, don't be afraid of it. Don't miss an opportunity because of that. Is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thank you for that. And yeah, great perspective to have. And certainly there are differences sometimes between those early career positions and, as you progress through. And, you touched on this as well. And I think there's a few questions in the chat around, the job search part of things. We've talked a lot about, choosing a career and that sort of thing. But we'd be interested to hear how you found the career opportunities that you did, how you got those, especially kind of first positions, maybe as students or as new grads. What worked well for you? And Ben?
Yeah, so for job searching, I think word of mouth has been the biggest thing that's worked for me. Just thinking back through the various positions I've had, there's probably a 60-40 split in favor of in favor of jobs where a friend has recommended me and someone has reached out and said, hey, we have a position and that we need to fill, and so has mentioned your name. Would you be interested? So that's how I've gotten a number of those positions, especially because for contract work especially, there tends to be a short turnaround time. So if they have if they've hit constraints with they just got confirmation of the budget, but the work starts in 2 weeks, they don't have a lot of time to find someone. So, and for early career especially, that's true. For government, whether it's government contracts or other funding sources, you don't get final confirmation until last minute oftentimes. So then they're looking for someone very quickly. So definitely the friends, coworkers, and previous supervisors too. A lot of people know each other in the environmental field, and your supervisors are definitely a case for that. So stay in touch with them, let them know what you're up to. And they might be talking to a friend of theirs that works at another organization, or to a coworker who ends up looking for someone, and they say, hey, I know a person, I can recommend them, here's their number. And as for actual applications, I think in early career, what helped me a lot was taking my work experiences, but also trying to leverage whatever I had from my personal side as well, whether that's sports as working within a team, or personally, I do a lot of hands-on things, and nonprofit organizations, as the others have said, being small teams, everyone does a little bit of everything. So if they see it, they saw the hands-on skills, and they knew that they could fill up that 10% category of duties as assigned. So that often helps too, or even just giving an indication of, will this person get along with the rest of my team? Because especially for the early career positions, you're going to be trained on what needs to be done. All they really need is someone that's reliable, that has a decent base knowledge, and that won't drive the rest of their team insane. So as long as you're willing to jump in and learn, and that comes through in the interview, there's a decent chance you'll get it regardless of what you know.
And I've heard that echoed by many employers in the environmental sector, especially when it comes to consulting, when you're going to be maybe spending long hours of the day, traveling from site to site, and, on trips and things like that, is often that even gets more important, that fit within the team, and just being eager and being a nice person to talk to sometimes does trump extra qualifications or experience.
Exactly, and I'll throw in one last thing too, especially if it's a living together situation. A lot of places have field houses. If you're with that person 24/7 for 4 months, 6 months in a row, you better get along.
Yes, good to keep in mind. Brittany, how has job finding worked for you? What kind of recommendations do you have for students?
Look everywhere, I suppose, which is not helpful, because I know when you say that, then you kind of, students probably are hearing, or when they hear that, are thinking, okay, great. How am I going to avoid burning myself out before I get a job? How do I prioritize my efforts? But really, I can point to a few key areas that I focused on for finding jobs. So there are tons of job boards around, especially like with environmental work. So go to the co-op and career services. Even if you're not a co-op student, go to them too, because they have the career services there. So U of G has job boards there. I can put in some links to a few others that are really great as well. Stuff like I think goodwork.ca is a very broad one. And there are also, if you think of like an industry association that's in an area that you're interested in, they might have a job board for job postings from companies that are their member companies, or worst case scenario, they have a whole directory of their members. And that would be my way. Like if I said, hey, I'm interested in finding a job in renewable energy, I would find a bunch of renewable energy associations, go check out their member directory, and you can check out to see if there are job postings at any of those companies in their directory. Associations and other similar organizations can be really great for networking as well. And I think we've talked a lot about how building those personal connections and doing that networking is a great way to find opportunities as well. So yeah, I'm happy to list a whole bunch in the chat, I suppose. But Women in Renewable Energy is a group that I've volunteered with for a number of years. That's really great for networking for women X who want to, even if you're not in renewable energy yet, it's a great way to get in and kind of learn your way around. Also academic connections. Like I did an undergrad research assistantship one of the summers after I came back from Germany, and I think it took a bit of convincing for the professor as to, you know, why should someone who's not even from the same college do this work. But, you know, state your case. I think interdisciplinary approach is a great way to go. So use that in your networking and your job search as well.
Yeah, great advice. And you really just never know until you ask, right? And if the worst thing that can happen is someone saying no to you, not too much to lose there, right? So it doesn't hurt. I know Carolina's added a few good industry-focused job boards into the chat, but if you have others that you want to add, Brittany, that would be great. And I just wanted to mention as well that industry associations and things like that often have reduced rates for students. So while you're still a student, that can be a great time to get a membership or join some of these associations and start doing that networking when you can do that at a very reduced cost in most cases. Mary, what do you have to add to the conversation around job searching?
I honestly don't have too much to add. I think pretty much everything that was said. I think networking is huge. So if you don't have one yet, like make a LinkedIn profile, find your supervisors, find your coworkers or fellow students. I find that that's very helpful. Yeah, that is probably your best bet. Personally, I found ECO pretty helpful as well. So yeah, I'm not too sure about a few of the others, but I'm sure they're pretty much the same. And even ECO, they do have a new professional designation, and you can apply in your final year in environmental science. So it's something to look into if that's something you're interested in. But yeah, for job searching, definitely networking. That was a big one for me, especially in consulting. They go a lot on kind of personal relationships, just so they know what your work ethic is going to be like and stuff like that. So they really like when someone can vouch for you. So if not, I mean, you just apply and just apply everywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Natalie, I'm wondering, since, our panelists so far have really talked about the importance of networking in a job search, what kinds of things did you do early in your career before you really had a strong professional network to make some of those connections?
So I, as an undergrad, volunteered for every single possible thing that I could find. That's how, actually, the way that I got into my current job is because I was in an organization called GSEC on campus, which if you're a Guelph grad, it's like the Guelph Students for Environmental Change. And then like years and years later, the person that I was like in this volunteer thing ended up interviewing me for a position. So it was really through that. Years later, he's like, "Oh, I remember you. Like you were in that club," and I was like, "Yeah." So I guess networking is like a big way. One thing that I do fairly often is like I have students email me that are just like, "Hey, how do I get started in this industry?" And I'll just like spend, some time having a conversation with them. So I did that, like last week, like a student from McMaster was like, "Hey, like, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that?" And I'll just like, very honestly, tell them. Yeah, so that's the first thing, definitely the networking. When applying, I would advocate, now this is just my personal experience. So just for the students that I'm hiring and for people in general, apply for things that are outside of your skill level and pay grade. So I have a lot of colleagues this summer that were like, "Oh my God, we need to fill this position. I've had 2 applicants and like, that's it." So, one of these positions, for instance, like needed a master's, but because they didn't have enough applicants, they were ready to hire somebody without a master's. So there were just, so many people probably saw that and were like, "Oh, I don't have the qualifications." So apply, go into it, and then during the interview, just say like, "Oh, like a master's is something I'm about to be working on," or "No, I don't know I'm not specifically proficient with Excel, but I really like Excel and like I can learn all of these things," and just say like, you're really excited about it. Another thing that I wrote down is that if you're looking for a full-time job and you find a job that's part-time and they say, "Oh yeah, we're gonna make you full-time eventually," like, they won't. They will, but it'll take them, if they do, it'll take them a very long time. So I see everybody kind of laughing. And I've had that happen, where they say like, "Oh, it's going to be, we'll give you benefits, but, later on, oh, we'll like, make you full time, but it'll be later on." So if you need that full time job, yeah, better to just, if you can afford to, keep looking. And the other thing is, knowing your worth and knowing your transferable skills. So for instance, like, "Oh, I've never been a field tech before, but I've been a tree planter and like I do, thorough hiking in Algonquin Park. So I can, apply those skills to, this and this and this, even if you haven't actually done those things." So like, looking at the boxes that the employer is checking off, in that, in the cover letter or whatever, just like, "Oh, I haven't done this, but here are the things that I know how to do from other experiences." So yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be paid experience to be valuable experience, right? I think that's a really important message. And those job ads, they're wish lists for employers. They don't expect to find someone who checks every single one of those boxes, and you never know what that applicant pool is going to look like. Sam, anything to add?
Not too much. Just to go off of what Natalie was saying, it's okay to exaggerate because everyone exaggerates. I learned that the hard way. You can really take, if you're looking at a job, you're like, "I don't have any of this sort of experiences." Take the experiences you do have and try your best to formulate it in a way that could support, what the requirements of the job are. Some things might be a stretch, but don't be afraid to do it. Another thing I could say is, for every 15 applications I put out there, I got maybe 1 or 2 calls back. So never be discouraged with how many applications you're putting out there. It will take a while. Don't let that discourage you. Job board wise, if you're interested in provincial government positions, federal government positions, they have their job boards. You can easily go on there and actually have set up a way for you to get notifications. So you can go in their job board and pinpoint what ministries you're interested in working for, and then you can get job notifications through your email. So you're not, going to the job board every day and seeing what's up. I don't think there's anything else I could add. Everyone did a great job. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. And it's hard to believe that our time is nearly up already. I'm sure the conversation could go on much longer. And I'm sorry, Vesta, we didn't get to you being able to ask your question, but if you're interested, students, connect with our panelists on LinkedIn. The conversations can carry on beyond the panel. And on that note, I'd just like to thank each of you for coming today, sharing your experiences, your wisdom with our students. It's so, so helpful, you know, and I'm sure you can remember what it's like to be approaching that graduation and that, you know, fear starting to creep in. So much great advice that you shared with our students today. So thank you so much for that. Have a fantastic afternoon, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you at some of the other events in this series tomorrow. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.